Catholic Clil Discussion 13, Content and Language Integrated Learning and Young Learners, recorded on the 16th of September 2010.
Sure, thanks. Right now I'm working mostly as a teacher trainer here in Spain, and I've been doing that full-time now since January of last year, so almost 2 years. And prior to that, I was working in primary and preschools here in Spain, some bilingual and some completely English. One was completely English medium. It was an international school. So students from all over the world, but receiving their education through English. And in the bilingual...
Sorry, carry on.
No, I said in the bilingual schools, the students were mostly Spanish, almost entirely Spanish.
And does your background also include some specific content area, like science?
I'm a general primary trained as a general primary teacher, so where our qualifications enable us to teach all the primary subjects.
Yeah. Well, great. It's great to have you. And very quickly, I hope you don't mind, Loretta and Peach, if I say a quick intro to you two. Loretta is a Germanist in northern Italy, and her English is very fluent, whatever she says about it, and she's doing research into Clil teacher profiles. And Peach is from Lucerne, Peach, in Switzerland?
Living in central Switzerland, yes. Just north of Lucerne, yeah.
And his background, if I'm right, is in younger learners, but you have a general interest in Clil, don't you, Peach?
I do, actually, because I'm the project manager for the introduction of English at primary school. That's where my initial interest came from, and I'm hoping to be part of a group introducing bilingual teaching, English and German, together with a content subject. That will be in a couple of years' time.
We've just had our first school day here in Bulgaria. Yesterday was kind of celebration day, and today was getting down to the nitty-gritty of it. And in my house, my daughter's 3. She's just started at nursery, and my sister's daughter's living with us at the moment. So she's British, but she's going to a language grammar school here in Plovdiv to study German. So we have quite an interesting educational experience mixed among the young learners in my family at the moment. Let's get on. And I posted a couple of kind of prompt questions on the website. Let me read them out, and I'll include a couple of other things, and then we'll just take it from there and see what grabs your attention first, and we'll start with that. A question that always comes up, is there an ideal age, or is there an age which we should not introduce the curriculum in another language at? We could look at that. And subjects, I hear people with very differing opinions about the best subjects and to-do subjects, for starting with the content in a foreign language with young learners. And then a methodology. I mean, is it the same across the age range? Can we specify things that we would say are particularly important the younger you get with children when doing the curriculum in another language? And can we list some of them as well? And again, talking about specific context, some of you with your vast experience, I'm sure, will have stories to tell about experiences, good and bad, with children and studying the content in a foreign language. And also, Loretta sent me an interesting piece of data from her research about teacher profiles. Perhaps we could talk about ideal teacher qualifications with younger children as well, and ask Loretta to talk us through the chart she sent us, which we can refer to on the website. And there are many others, aren't there, of course. Some of them I'm a little bit afraid of getting involved in talking about assessments with young children, published materials and teaching content through assessment. If there are any out there, or contexts where they're a great lack. And I'm sure you've got other ideas as well. Is there something that is a bit of a carrot and you'd like to get your teeth into straight away? Anybody?
I'm open for anything. I'm open for anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Lauretta, would you mind if we start with your data? Because I think talking about teacher characteristics is quite a good place to start, actually, when talking about teachers who work with children and the content curriculum in a foreign language. Now, that's posted on the Fact World website on the discussion page. So if you have that available to you, great. But if not, don't worry.
I'm looking at it.
Lauretta can describe it for us.
Yes. Yes. Okay. The data that I used to prepare this chart referred to what teachers declared to be their pupils. So, and as it was not possible, I mean, to compare school levels because they are so different in Italy, Spain, and in the European group, I divided the group into age group. So not primary or secondary school students, but age group. And it is very interesting for me, at least, to observe how the curve develops, because you can observe that there is, a good diffusion of Clil in the primary school age, that is between 6 and 8 years old students, and then there is a decrease, and then the curve begins to increase slowly till the age of 14, 16, and then it decreases sharply in Spain, while it remains stable in Italy and Europe. I don't know if it is clear enough or not.
So these are actually, this data is talking about teachers that teach these age groups.
Yes.
Okay.
So, and of course, these results mean something. They can be related to the context. For example, I know that in Spain there is a bilingual program, to foster English learning at early in primary school or infancy schools.
Yes.
What is not happening, for example, in Italy, or it's starting to happen in Italy. And there is the problem of selection exams during the last years of the baccalaureate. And people tend to avoid to teach Clil because they are not sure that they can comply with all the requirements of the selectivity exam.
Does
right.
Italy have very clear requirements for teacher
No.
and qualification?
No, we don't have. Well, we are prepared. I think last Friday was signed the new agreement about the qualification of Clil teachers, future Clil teachers, so we don't have. But Spain has a very vague qualification for Clil teacher, because in some communities they require a B1, a B2, but generally between B1 and B2, and I think this is also the real level of competence of.
Does that differ across the age groups, Lauretta, in your experience? I mean, is there
No.
a similar expectation for language proficiency with, say, 6 to 8-year-old teachers and 12 to 14-year-old teachers?
Yeah, I mean, it is the same. There is no difference, no important, relevant difference. I mean, upper secondary teacher, English teacher, can or generally have the same qualification of a primary school English teacher. I mean, this is what really happens, because sometimes there is a difference between what is declared and what happens.
Right.
And, I don't know if...
no, absolutely, I agree. But this, for what you're saying, it definitely sounds like the teachers that I've met and worked with.
Mm-hmm. So, and I think the situation is very similar in Italy. And as far as European, I mean, this is very vague because I received about 65 questionnaires from different European countries. You can see that there is a regular increase. And this regular increase could be interpreted as, simply the use of English, general English, as medium to teach a subject. I'm not sure it is a real Clil, it is more kind of, use of English just to teach a subject. Sometimes even not being aware that you are doing something similar to Clil lesson. I mean, some colleague answered that they were teaching in a foreign language, but they had never heard the word Clil.
Right. Yeah, I've heard of that as well.
Yes.
Is there I imagine it's similar in other countries, certainly in Bulgaria, children today have studied from the second grade, let's say, at least one foreign language. All over the country, most children now in Bulgaria study a foreign language, if not two, in primary school. So the reason I mention that is when they get to secondary, their options and their expectations are very diverse and very broad. Occasionally, children choose to avoid English because they've had a lot of English in primary and they want to study German, for example, when they get to secondary school. I wonder if that's common in your context.
As far as I know, normally when you begin with in a bilingual section learning English, normally you tend to go on with the language you learned. And I think this will happen more and more also in Italy.
The situation in Switzerland is quite diverse due to the fact that, of course, there are French-speaking communities and German-speaking communities and Italian-speaking communities in the whole country. What happened here during the last couple of years was that about 10 years ago, either French in the German-speaking part or German in the French-speaking part was introduced as the first foreign language in grade 5. That would have been age 10 or 11. And we introduced English now as the first foreign language in grade 3, which is age 8. That happened in 2005, 2007 in central Switzerland. It happened in the canton of Zurich. And a year later, it also happened in eastern Switzerland. So English has actually supplanted French as the first foreign language. In the French-speaking part, they are now doing exactly the same, but they are starting with German in grade 3, and then follow that up by using or introducing English in grade 5. So,
I imagine in your country, there's very simply an expectation for multiple language provision across the country, across the board, isn't there?
Yes, but the sensitive issue, of course, is sort of the battle between, on the one hand, English as a non-official foreign language and the two official languages, German and French. The further east you travel, the less important French becomes, and therefore English is more important, or is regarded as being more important than French. Whereas in the French-speaking part, because they are a minority, they still think that German is more important than English, and that's why they start with German in grade 3 and then English in grade 5. But by the end of primary school, at the end of grade 6, most, or I'd say all pupils in Switzerland will now leave with 2 foreign languages, with the option that they can start a 3rd foreign language in grammar school. In grade 7.
I've just come from a conference in Bilbao in the Basque Country where the government there, for want of a better term, is relaunching its trilingual initiative in education. And this relaunch has brought the whole issue of mother tongue versus foreign languages or second language and foreign language onto the agenda again, and all of the questions I imagine are going to talk about here are on people's lips.
Right.
Bilbao and the Basque Country right now.
That happens in several regions in Spain because several regions have autonomous languages, and so they already deliver their curriculum in 2 languages, and then to include either French or English as another language to deliver a subject, they're limited sometimes as to which subjects they can deliver in a 3rd language.
And I as an advocate of Clil, would claim that Clil offers solutions rather than causes obstacles and problems.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And I think really the reason for that is my belief that Clil is about identifying language and then making decisions about what you do in the classroom to provide support for that language in whatever subject it is, or whatever language it is. And it sounds very simple to me, but obviously there are social and political issues behind language and cultural issues as well in these countries.
Very much so.
I suppose if we can talk about what those solutions are and what Clil offers, that's a very rich and useful use of our time here in Cafe Clil. So, would you like to take that question on the agenda? We've got, what are the pluses of a Clil methodology, key aspects for young learners?
Absolutely, I absolutely agree with what you said, and I've often, in talking to teachers, I've said that I think that before introducing bilingual programs, that really what should be looked at is the kind of methodology the teachers are using in general. And I often have said that I think it would be good on a Clil course to have the L1 teachers as well, because the same kind of techniques that we use in Clil in the 2nd language can be very helpful in the 1st language. And if the teachers are working in the same way, it can make the transition much easier for students. And I've had actually one teacher training center in Spain ask about a course in Spanish about using these kind of techniques. So I think that's a positive sign.
Yeah, is that the case in Italy? Do you find, Switzerland as well, do you find that you can get these diverse groups of teachers together in one room for training purposes?
Yes, it happens. I think there was a course about transversal language competencies or something like that, and it aimed to make teachers in the language areas, mother tongue and 2nd language, all the possibility to exploit competencies acquired first in the mother tongue and then in the 2nd languages. There is a tendency to make people aware of the fact that competence in languages is something transversal.
In Switzerland, I still think that because of the fact that the driving force behind introducing Clil comes from the language teacher side and not from the subject teacher side, there's still quite some resistance against doing some training sessions together, subject teachers and language teachers.
That's my experience as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I think the people who look at Clil and think it's quite an appealing thing is foremost politicians and, as I said, language teachers. The politicians, because they see the potential for saving money, because they can merge two subjects and sort of, or that's at the forefront of their thinking. Language teachers predominantly because they can see the potential that students will still be sort of, after 3 or 4 years of studying English, be motivated by focusing more on the content of what's going on in language classrooms than the actual language. I mean, grammar and vocabulary practice, I say.
Yeah. And my experience in the Basque Country, I refer to quite a lot because it is a very diverse educational environment. Is one where I find the need to bring in mother tongue content teachers in the classroom with language teachers, and also teachers who teach subjects in another language, to get them all talking with each other is great. You know, it seems so obvious that they need to talk to each other, particularly in a country like the Basque Country, where very rich region of Spain, and they've got a growing population of migrant children who now are invited to cope with their curriculum in Basque, in Spanish, and in English in the same classroom with other Spanish children or other Basque children. And so the government there is investing in investigating how to cope with this diversity, and one of them is training language support teachers for Basque and language support teachers for Spanish. And I think Clil, if they get together with the teachers who have been teaching subjects in English or in French or in other languages, they can learn a lot from each other. They can share so much about language methodology and content methodology. And I think that's what Clil is all about, really. It's about creating a methodology for a specific classroom. I've paused a little bit because I'm trying to bring John in. Do continue while I sort of see if he's coming.
I would like maybe to add something about the charts I sent to you.
Go ahead.
There was some speculation I did about it, and I think they were supported by other results of the research. If you look at the peak concerning a pupil between 6 and 8, it could be interpreted by the fact that at this age you don't have, you introduce a foreign language mainly as something, a play, or just doing some activity at schools. But when when the pupils get older, so between 10 and 12, you need to introduce more content, but teachers generally think they do not have the necessary competence. To learn content in a foreign language. So they need to acquire a higher level of competence. And then the introduction of Clil increases when teachers think the pupils maybe have, or they do have, a higher level of competence. It is to say, starting from the age of 13, 14. But, this consideration can, lead to other consideration. For example, to the fact that teachers think that you need a good level, or I mean an acceptable level of language competence, I mean to learn a content in a foreign language. So I don't know if I was clear, but I mean the curve can be interpreted, supported by other data also from this point of view.
Yeah, have you thought of a possible explanation that, for example, when a foreign language is introduced at the age of 6 or between 6 and 8, there's an initial sort of very high motivation, and
yes,
then teachers
course, yeah.
feel that, especially on the productive side, pupils do not deliver as much as they had hoped for. Therefore, motivation to go on teaching Clil results in this dip, and then picks up again once the pupils are a bit older and intellectually more mature.
Yes,
Would that
of
be an
course.
explanation?
Yes, but it is related also to the one I gave. I mean, it's I mean the fact that actually expectations are too high, maybe. Especially when you speak of bilingual education, and then you perceive that actually pupils are not so, I mean, do not correspond to the expectation. Maybe they deliver what they have to deliver, but they do not correspond to the expectation. And then you need, I mean, to improve their language competence in order to, I mean, to engage again with Clil activity.
In a way, though, Loretta, when we talk about teachers of younger learners, and Pat is one here, and I know Peter's background is doing a lot in teaching young learners. They, as far as I'm aware, they have a whole curriculum outlook for their learners, and their methodology incorporates those thoughts and ideas about the whole curriculum. And so what I'm trying to suggest is the way I think about young learner teachers, they're more prepared for thinking about the language of the curriculum because of this perspective they have, this whole curriculum perspective, than secondary teachers who are by definition within their own subjects in many countries.
Yes, definitely, yes.
Can I say something
Yes.
here? Yeah, I find that, I mean, teachers obviously are prepared to teach different subjects and they're used to that, but I don't find that teachers are used to looking at a subject like science or geography, you know, on a primary level, and looking at the language that they use when they teach that subject, whether they teach it in their first language or in a second language. And that's something they need to be taught how to do, to say, okay, I have to teach this unit about, I don't know, a geography unit about islands. I need to look and see what language will come up in this unit to help me get that content across. I don't find that teachers are used to doing that, and that's something that they need to be helped with. And when I started doing it, I wasn't used to looking at it that way either. But once you learn to do it, it's a very helpful skill. And teachers...
I'm sorry, it feels like I'm doing something very bad, but I realize that one of the things we can do here is make reference to useful links and useful resources, and I wanted to throw in, Patty, a reference to curriculum mapping and curriculum language mapping. I've got a copy of the summer edition of the Nowsic Quarterly Journal, and there's an article in it by the EAL, English as an Additional Language Consultant, called Andy Harvey. It's about planning language in the primary curriculum. And there's another reference I'm going to throw in there as well, which is from an American context, and it's a book by Heidi Hayes Jacobs called Active Literacy Across the Curriculum, and there's a section here where Hayes Jacobs writes about the need, and she's just talking about literacy within mother tongue groups when she writes it, the need for planning language across the whole curriculum. And she talks a lot about using technology to do this as well, through spreadsheets and hyperlinks and so on, and sharing information about learners. And I think the principle, in a way, is one which is at the heart of a good Clil methodology. identifying language that learners need within specific subjects, but also across the curriculum to share with other subjects.
Absolutely, because you have your subject-specific vocabulary, but then you have vocabulary that will come up in several different subjects. It's very different to speak PE as to speak math or to speak science, you know. So I think that's helpful for everyone, that teachers look at the language they use in their curriculum.
Yeah, I totally agree, because I personally feel very strongly about the fact that even mother tongue teachers, subject teachers who teach their subjects should think of the kind of language that learners need in order to deal with academic texts and the language of learning that particular subject. Keith, could you put these references on our website?
Yes, I will. That's one of the reasons I really interrupted Patty, because if it's in the recording, then I know it will be it'll be written up later.
Good, good.
And there's John's just joined us, and perhaps I could bring John in if he's not gone off somewhere else. Are you there, John?
I'm there, Keith. Yeah. Sorry for being late.
Don't worry. It's great that you could manage to get in and join us. We've been talking about many things, and we've got to the stage where we're picking at the bones of a Clil methodology for young learners, and I think we've got a consensus among us that identifying language for work within the classroom, whatever subject it is fundamental, and planning that language within the curriculum on a slightly higher level is also very, very important. And you and I had a conversation quite recently about, I think it was the teacher education SIG, talking about subject-specific vocabulary, and you had the impression that there was a feeling or a leaning towards moving back to traditional approaches for teaching vocabulary in that group.
Yeah, I don't know whether it's so. I mean, I suppose they are traditional. I don't know whether they would see them in traditional terms, because I mean that discussion. I mean, if anybody wants to go to the TT Ed SIG archive, I think it's just finished, and it's a very interesting discussion. And it was led by a lot of research on vocabulary acquisition. But certainly there was a strain of it where they thought there was a lot of research to support the learning of vocabulary items out of context. Just the learning of vocabulary items and their meanings by, for example, vocabulary cards. I mean, I'm sure they think that it's important to learn vocabulary as you use it and as you hear people using it and as you read it, but nevertheless, there's also an awful lot of support for lots of different ways of just learning, 20 words. Mind you, I think I didn't see enough of the discussion to know whether that was very context dependent. For example, whether they would say that that was true for young learners and very young learners. I imagine they would say it wasn't. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think you're probably right. But it is a question we can throw out and talk about in the group, isn't it? If you've got learners in any country working in other languages, and there's bound to be specific terminology they need, and time restraints and restrictions on what you can do in the classroom with them, and we need suggestions for ways and means for coping with that, don't we, for teachers. And I've seen some wonderful examples from Spain, from the bilingual Spanish program, where language support teachers work alongside subject teachers in junior schools, and they focus on the language problem areas identified within the content lessons in language focus lessons. You know, that's obviously a very heavily invested approach to dealing with language in the curriculum. But the walls were all full of language. There were language posters, and
absolutely, very important.
And I suppose we could say the opposite is true, isn't it? That a learning environment has no visual prompts for children is going to be a less Clil enriching environment. If that makes sense.
Definitely, yes, definitely. The thing which I'd like to comment on what John said is that vocabulary learning is something that should be done. I totally agree with that. I also agree with the fact that it shouldn't be decontextualized. It should always be embedded, especially at primary level, embedded in meaningful context. At the moment, we're facing a sort of a drive, on the one hand by teachers, on the other hand by parents, to reintroduce vocabulary lists and vocabulary cards. And one of the reasons why they want to reintroduce these things is basically because of the transition from primary over to secondary, because secondary school teachers always want to know what words have they come across, what words do they need to know, and parents likewise. And we're trying to sort of resist that drive towards vocabulary cards and lists, because a majority of teachers will then simply ask students to take the lists or the cards home and learn these words for homework for another day or another lesson. And that, for me, is taking vocabulary out of context.
Well, I tend to agree with you, Pete, but to be honest, the discussion, this was a discussion led, their discussion leader was Paul Nation, who was just about the king of vocabulary.
Yeah, I know.
And I've read him saying this recently before, that there's research which goes against what I've always thought. You know what I mean? Now, I think it's probably, as we were saying before, probably less relevant to young learners, and certainly not to very young learners. But as kids get able to use their cognitive facilities, you know, to make language learning go better from a cognitive point of view, I think we'll find that the research is really quite strong on some ways of learning vocabulary out of context. And you know, Paul Nation used to, in the last few days, he's been prefacing these contributions to the discussion by saying, you won't like this, but. So I think it's just something to bear in mind. I mean, it's fairly new to me in the last few years. But
yeah, totally new to me, and as you say, contrary to what I believe, but it sounds intriguing to me, and I'd like to read more about that.
Well, we'll put a link to the discussion group, because I'm sure it is open. Once people join, they can access the archive and read stuff. They may even publish summary of the discussion.
Yeah, I was wanted to say as well about as far as vocabulary. I think there's a need also to be selective about the vocabulary that you choose to highlight in a Clil lesson. I found with the situation here in Spain, initially a lot of textbooks were just directly translated from Spanish into English, and there was a very, very heavy vocabulary load. When science was taught in Spanish, for example, and now it's being taught in English. And so teachers need to look at, okay, is it more important for the students to really learn all the names of all the bones, or is it more important to learn about different types of bones and how they work and how they fit together? Do I really need to know the names of all of those, or all the names of the different types of trees? You know, can I just learn the different groups of trees and some characteristics of each group? So I think there's a need to look at how much vocabulary is being highlighted and to really select that which is most important. I don't know if anyone wants to say anything about that.
Yeah, I think you're right. If I just get very quickly, I think partly, I don't know whether you're actually saying this, but related issue is that it's important to make distinctions between vocabulary types, isn't it? I mean, there's your group of very subject-specific words, which is all the names of the bones, and then there's much broader sort of terms which might be used to classify the bones and to talk about them, sort of more general academic vocabulary. And then there's much more sort of everyday vocabulary, which you'd always also use in school to talk about bones. So I think my feeling is let's talk about let's be differentiated when we talk about vocabulary and use different classes of vocabulary, because you do different things with them and you use a different methodology for these different classes of vocabulary.
Yep, I'm just making notes. Excuse me. I mean, we talked a lot about vocabulary. We mentioned a little bit about visuals and a rich language-supported environment. I once hosted a discussion in the Young Learners SIG about Clil for young learners, and there's a write-up available of that discussion as well, which I'll put in a link on the web page in our minutes. And there were very clear descriptions of, you know, good young learners Clil methodology there in that description from other teachers joining in the debate, and they included a lot of discussion about, you know, focusing on fluency at an earlier age than accuracy.
Yes,
and that,
absolutely.
That translates into specific activity types as well, doesn't it? You know, it's moving away from dictation and text capture type activities, and I'm generalising, you know, there are lots more of them, to setting up communication between two children when they've got a bit of a prompt, which is language
right
to help them. Can you think of examples from your experience, Patty, that we can actually make concrete suggestions with to the listeners?
Are you talking about for fostering oral communication or just in general?
Well, I think I'm talking generally, but I think if you want to give an oral example, that would be fine.
Okay. Yeah, I think getting teachers comfortable with maybe not necessarily knowing what every student is doing at all times, finding times in the class where you can have simultaneous talking going on. And if you want that to happen with children, you want them to practice language in small groups, there has to be a lot of modeling done of that. They have to be given an example. You have to put up the structure that you want them to use when they're doing their small group work, so they can have a visual cue to help them remember if they forget, because they may know what they want to say, but they may not be sure about how to organize it. And a lot of teachers aren't comfortable with not knowing what the students are all doing, because of course you can't monitor everyone when everyone's talking in small groups. But that's okay, because as you said, the focus is more on fluency than on accuracy. There are other activities we can do when we want to work specifically on accuracy. But in a subject class, we should be working more on the fluency and getting the concepts and being able to explain what we want to say. I think also giving children alternatives to only using verbal explanations of their understanding, allowing them to use diagrams, graphic organizers, and us using visuals and graphic organizers as much as possible. We give explanations, can help make them more comprehensible to the children.
In the book I mentioned earlier, Active Literacy Across the Curriculum, one suggestion is allowing children to express concepts in their own words, focusing on what their expression is, actually writing up or getting children to write what they're saying, and then using that to translate into the language, and I'm making speech mark symbols here, the language of the subject, so the formal language, and helping children to move from their own jargon to the formal language of the subject.
Right.
Okay.
So definitely, but if you want students to use that subject-specific language, you have to find ways to scaffold that. Like you said, they can tell you what they've understood, but then you need to give them the words that you want them to try to say. So let's try to say it this way now. And you can show them the words that you want them to try to incorporate into what they've just explained. So yeah. I definitely think that vocabulary needs to be seen in the classroom, and it needs to be referred to all the time. Yeah. And we have to be able to scaffold their use of it.
I mean,
and not worry about them making mistakes, because if they're afraid that they're going to be singled out if they make an English mistake, then they're not even going to try.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, and making mistakes is part of learning, as we know. You know, it's something that you can't actually do learn. You can't actually learn something without making mistakes, because you're developing. We all know that. And one suggestion, which makes so much sense, is showing children, as John described, the kind of role different words have. You know, they can see which are the high frequency words in a subject. If the teacher point it out to them. They can be shown which are the subject-specific words that they really should make an effort to remember, memorize even, and they can be shown language which is enriching, which is embellishing the language of the subject. And the book I refer to again from Heidi Hayes-Jacobs suggests presenting words in those three columns: high-frequency words, specialized terminology, and then embellishments and tasks that then focus on choosing which words to use and to express themselves.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think
I do
specific expression, and sorry, John, but specifically focusing on how important words are is, I think, part of Clil methodology.
Absolutely. I don't know if you've ever, in primary school, I think some secondary teachers use it as well. We call them word walls. And you have your word wall, and you have your vocabulary up, and as you introduce words, or they come into the unit, then you put them on the word wall, or you select words with the children, which are the most important words to go on our word wall. And then you use that word wall for revision activities, or when there's a speaking activity, you remind them the words are on the word wall to help them, or if they have to do a piece of writing, the words are there, to just make those words explicit. I've even worked with one teacher who had a tick system, and they had their words on the word wall for that particular unit, and as the children encountered those words in their reading or their activities, they were asked to raise their hands and point them out on the word wall, so they would be ticked on the word wall, just to help the children be more aware of those words, and to have a visual reinforcement every time they heard the word or wanted to use the word.
Yeah.
And there are lots of references to those on internet word walls and how to use them.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good example of the approaching vocabulary learning from these two sides. That on the one hand, you have to approach it from the side of the meaningful context. You learn it within a meaningful context. But on the other hand, there's another part of your brain which is working much more positively and checking words as you use them, and being more being more cognitively aware of them. Can I just for out of interest, can I just show you something that here that I don't know if you can see this. Can you see this?
Yes. Let's see.
You all have that text?
Yeah, I've just put a text on there from Paul Nation about decontextualized learning of vocabulary. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'll pinch the quote and I'll put it in our minutes, John.
But he does, you'll see at the end, he does say that the decontextualized part is only one part of it, and the other part is the meaningful part.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think using a word card automatically makes a word decontextualized. I think you can use a word card words that, I don't know if that's the part that's becoming...
No, I think you're right.
That's what I wanted to say. Sorry, that's what I wanted to say before. Decontextualize does not mean that if you write it on a word card, if that word has been used before in meaningful context, then it becomes clear to the learners what it means. Decontextualized is, in my experience, if you simply hand out word lists grouped along or around a topic and tell the students, without any reference to what has been going on before in the classroom, learn these words.
Look these words up and learn them. Yes, I agree.
I agree also, yeah.
Yeah. I think I agree with you about that, yeah.